Okay, welcome back to math. Here's your lesson for today. We're going to learn to write percents as decimals and as fractions. There's 5 examples that we're going to be going through in this video, but I'm actually going to get rid of one of them for you because I think it's a little redundant. Make sure you write down today's date and page number as well. Here is your warm-up. You got 4 questions I want you to try your best at. Take the two, number 1 and 2, and try to write those as a decimal. And then write each decimal as a fraction. These are things we're going to be doing in class, but I want to see how well you can do it ahead of time. Here are the 4 answers you should have had for the problems. So for number 1 and 2, change a fraction to a decimal is just a division problem. Just dividing the denominator into the numerator. And I found it to be 0.75. And for number 2, 9/10 comes out to be 9/10. Now, writing a fraction as a decimal is pretty easy. The number you see in the decimal place values is your numerator, and that last place value, you can see I underline the 5. I guess I underline the 5 here. That would tell you what place value is going to become the denominator. So hopefully you got these 4 pretty easy problems to get us started today. All right, sometimes you're going to see percent whenever you go shopping, and one of the things you'll normally see percent with is sales tax. So most states that you go to have a sales tax on things you purchase. Sales tax is basically a percent of the item's price. So the first definition I want us to talk about is the word percent. Percent is a ratio of a number to 100. So anytime you have a percent, it means something out of 100. So the example we have here is 8%. That also means 8 per 100, or 8 out of 100. So I want you to write these down so you have an example, a good example at the bottom, and also what the definition of percent is before moving on. All right, so you don't need to write this down, but I do want to kind of talk about it. If you're looking at 8% in certain statements, you would probably see statements that say this following. So one would say for every dollar you spend, 8 cents is sales tax. That's 8%. Or for every $10 you spend, 80 cents would be sales tax at that 8% rate, and $100 spent would be $8 in sales. So remember, because percent means out of 100, or 100 out of 100 would be 100%, this is why 100% is often used to mean all or the whole thing. It's kind of like having a whole number as a fraction, or having 1.0 as a decimal. All right, so we're going to skip the first example and we're going to move right to example 2. So the first thing we're going to look at here in example 2 is how to write percents as fractions. Kind of showed you how easy it is to do with a decimal. Percent's really not much different. So if I told you to write 35% as a fraction, and then in simplest form, obviously, because we had to simplify it, remember that percent means out of 100. Percent equals out of 100. So if we're ever dealing with fractions, your denominator all of a sudden is 100 because that's always your whole. So 35% is just the same as writing 35 over 100. Now because it says simplest form, now we have to find a common factor of 35 and 100 that we can divide both those numbers by. Because it ends in a 5 or 0, you have to find multiples, or you have to find numbers that can go into 5 or 0. And 5 is the only number that you can divide both by that will simplify it to 7/20. So 35% is 7/20. It's the same thing. So 35% is 7/20. That's all you have to do to be able to solve these. Go ahead and write this down before moving on. All right, so here you go. You have 4, 5, and 6. I'm even going to help you by doing 4 for you again. And 5 and 6 is on your own. So if you want to try 4 on your own, pause the video and then come back. All right, so again, we said percent is out of 100. So for every single one of these, your denominator is just going to be 100. Then all you have to do is look at the number. That becomes your numerator. Now we know 25 and 100 can be simplified, though. Since we got to put it in simplest form, let's do that. So what number can you divide 25 and 100 by? Well, if you're not quite sure, you notice that they end in a 5 or 0. The only number that you could divide them by would be 5. So 25 divided by 5 is 5, and 100 divided by 5 is 20. Now you should be looking at this and go, oh, I can actually simplify this again. I could divide them both by 5 because, again, I have a 5 and 0 kind of situation. 5 divided by 5 is 1, and 20 divided by 5 is 4. So the simplest form of 25 1/100ths, or 25%, is 1/4. Okay, good luck on 5 and 6. All right, here are the answers you should have gotten for 5 and 6. For 5, it's 80 over 100. You can divide that by 10, and I got 8/10, and then I divided it by 2, and I got 4/5. For 6, I got 54 over 100, and the only number I could find that they could be divisible by was 2. So 2 goes into 54 and 100, so I got 27/50ths. I hope you got the same. If you did, give someone in the classroom a high five. Doesn't have to be me. And don't tell them while you're doing it if they haven't gotten this far in the video. It's kind of fun to watch. All right, we're going to breeze through example 3. Example 3 is looking at the same thing, just applying it in a word problem. So if it said Janelle has 20% body fat, and it tells you to write 20% as a fraction in simplest form, you already know that 20% means 20 out of 100, or 20/100ths. Now you just got to find numbers that you can divide 20 and 100 by. Well, you can divide 20 and 100 by 20, and you get 1/5, and that's how you get 1/5. Now, if you didn't know that 20 goes into 100, you could have started to do a little bit of work and go, well, they both end in 0, so I could divide by 10. 20 divided by 10 gives me 2, and 100 divided by 10 gives me 10. And then from here, you can say, oh, I can divide that by 2, and 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 10 divided by 5 is 1, so that's how you get 1/5 too. Either way, you're just kind of putting it into a word problem. Should be able to figure it out. If you haven't yet, copy this down before moving on. All right, here are 2 problems I want you to try now, where you're going to be able to figure out both of them. You have to write them in simplest form, changing them from a percent to a fraction. Good luck. Come back when you're done. And here are the answers you should have gotten. You can see my work. 23/25ths for number 7, and also I knew number 24 was 4/5 because we just did a problem with 80 a little bit ago, so I was able to figure that out. Hopefully you got the same answers. If you did, come give me a fist pound. All right, now we'll take a little bit of time with example 4, since now we're going to be looking at how to take percents and write them as a decimal. So let's remember again that percent means out of 100, okay? Out of 100. Now, if we remember what we learned about fractions earlier this year, if we have out of 100, that always tells us what place value we're going to have to write to. Now, there's 2 ways we can do this. One, you can just divide 100 into 56. The other thing to remember is 100 also is the same as hundredths. And how many place values is 100ths in? Well, if we had 1.23, 1 is the ones place. To move to the 2, that's the tenths. And one more time, that's the hundredths place value. So really all you have to know, besides doing all the division, is you can simply just take the decimal point sitting after the whole number, 56, and move it twice, same as putting into the hundredths place value. So that's how you can get 0.56 quicker too. So 56% is 0.56, or 56 hundredths, again, out of 100. So it should be that simple. You can copy all this down if you want, or you can put down the remember box, because that's what I was showing you. All right, before you do it on your own, I'm going to have you do 25 through 32. I know it's a lot, but you'll find it to be super easy. I'm going to do 8, 9, and 10. Now, if you want to try 8, 9, and 10 on your own before we do it, go ahead, and then you can come back and see how you did. So remember, percent means out of 100, or hundredths. So if I look at 72%, I know every whole number has a decimal after it. So hundredths means I have to move the decimal point twice. If I do that, now I have 0.72. For 4, it looks a little tricky, but remember, you still got to move the decimal point twice. Once, and then one more. What do we do with this empty space? You put a 0 there. So it's 0.04. And 90%, again, we have the decimal here. We just move it twice. You get 0.90. And again, you have that 9 or that 0 hanging off after the 9. You don't need that. You could just have 0.9 to make it work. Now, that's all you have to do. So go ahead and do the other 8 problems. Come back when you're done. We'll see how you did. All right, and here are the answers I got for all the problems. Just move the decimal twice, and that's what you get. So hopefully you got all these correct as well. If you did, give yourself a pat on the back, and then we can move on. Now, for example 5, same as it kind of was with example 3, it's a repeat. We're looking at word problems. So if it said water is made up 85% of fluids that Kirk drank yesterday, write 85% as a decimal. Remember, decimal means 85 out of 100 or 85 hundredths. So we can just move the decimal twice, and that should be all you need to do. So these word problems aren't much different. You just see words around them trying to confuse you. Okay, copy this down if you need to. All right, so just a little more practice here with these 2 problems. Go ahead and figure out what 64% would be as a decimal and 2% as a decimal. Good luck. And here are the answers you should have gotten for these. So all you had to do is move the decimal twice. Now, if you had, just to kind of show you this, if you had the decimal here of 64 hundredths and 2 hundredths, you see they're hundredths, so they're percent. If I said turn these into a percent, all you would have to do is reverse it. Move the decimal back, and now you have 64%, because you moved it to the hundredths place value. 2, if I move that back, gets you at 2%. So you can move backwards, you can move forwards. This is a pretty simple, easy process to get either a percent to a decimal or a decimal to a percent. All right, let's move on. Here is your box of thought. You got 2 questions I want you to look at. So number 1, explain why the ratio 2 to 5 is different from 5 to 2. Let's not forget that stuff. And then tell whether the ratios of 4 to 5 and 16 to 25 are equivalent. If they are not, give a ratio that is equivalent to 4 to 5. So see if those are correct. And here is your quiz. 5 wonderful questions that you're going to do. First 2 are turning them into a fraction in simplest form. 3 and 4 are looking at turning them into a decimal. And 5 is going back to a fraction. And again, it says write the fraction in simplest form, but also you have to write it as a decimal. So a fraction and a decimal. Good luck. And that's your lesson for today. Way to hang in there. We'll see you next time.